Prime Minister, just one question about raw materials. Could you please explore a bit more what Canada can realistically actually offer to Germany and Europe, given the fact that ports on the East Coast and also pipelines are still lacking?
Okay, you're welcome to take the second part of that, my question, if you wish. Thanks for the question. Look.
When I was much younger, I worked as Preston Manning's assistant in Parliament in the late 1990s. That was in the last century. One of my jobs was to manage question period for the opposition. Of course, it's not called answer period for a reason. The idea was to make the questions stand on their own, so that no matter what excuse the government would come up with, the point would come across in the question. I got to know not only the Reform Party MPs, which was pretty fun, but the style of the various Liberal cabinet ministers who answered. Every day we'd have a dress rehearsal before the actual QP, as we called it. And I would sometimes play the role of different Liberals, which was fun. Now, this was a generation ago, so the names might not even ring a bell for you. This was the era of Alan Rock and Paul Martin and Anne McClellan. Rock was atrocious, always was. But boy, I long for the days of the moderate Liberal. There used to be such a thing like Paul Martin, who actually balanced a budget, and Anne McClellan, who actually helped birth, at least legally and politically, the oil sands. I mean, don't forget that part. Justin Trudeau and now Mark Carney have spent the last 10 years trying to destroy the oil sands in every possible way. But 25 years ago, the Liberals tried to grow it. They were proud of it. And although Jean Chrétien, the Prime Minister, signed the Kyoto Protocol, he literally did nothing about it other than say he cared. I should also point out that that Chrétien pumped the brakes on Brian Mulroney's immigration extremism. Yeah, you heard me right. Under Mulroney, immigration tripled from around 85,000 people a year to around 250,000. Chrétien actually reduced it a bit, if you can believe it. Yeah. Today's Liberals are completely unrecognizable by those standards, absolutely dedicated to out-of-control spending and taxing and borrowing. Environmental extremism is so important to them. Feminism and banning anyone who's pro-life. You cannot be a pro-life Catholic in the Liberal Party. You can be pro-life Muslim. Of course, every Muslim is pro-life. It's a very strange party now compared to really the Big Tent coalition of Chrétien. Today, it's mass immigration, the diaspora politics. I would actually give anything to reset Canada to what it was like back then. I was always a conservative or a reformer, but now I sort of look at the Paul Martin, Jean Chrétien Liberals and say, you know, I'd sort of vote for that now too if I could. Bit of a trip down memory lane for me. Chrétien sometimes answered questions in question period, but often he would let his deputy handle them. And forgive me my long detour here, but that's actually one of my points. The deputy prime minister for a chunk of Chrétien's term as PM was a soft-spoken member of parliament from Windsor named Herb Gray. He was the consummate loyalist, self-deprecating. He made an art out of being low energy, low key. He joked about herbomania. You know, he just swallowed up questions in question period by taking all the energy out of them. We called Herb Gray the Gray Fog. Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague, but I regret I must take issue with the premise of his question insofar as, I mean, he would bore you to death. No anger, no fire, just a fog machine, a fog into which you could walk and you could never be seen again. But there was something lawyerly about it, I guess, and even though it was low energy, it wasn't just duck speak, as Orwell would say. It wasn't just babbling. It was a bureaucratic answer, but it was an answer, I guess. But the past is a different country, isn't it? What a world we're in now. Did you see the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, at the big gathering at the White House last week for Vladimir Zelensky? Trump and the Seven Dwarves, I call it, each of the European leaders trying to appear so important when everyone knew the only decider in the room was Trump himself. But they had all flown over all the way to America, so they were given about 2 minutes each to say their piece. Do you remember Keir Starmer, that's a British PM? Do you remember his 2 minutes? Just listen to this and tell me if you understood any of it or if it was duck speak, not Herb Gray bureaucratic speak, but just blah, 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 blah. Do you understand what any of this means?
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you for hosting us here. Can I start where Emmanuel started, which is we all want peace. the war in Ukraine has had a huge impact, particularly on the Ukrainians who've borne the brunt of it, but it's also had an impact on Europe and on the United Kingdom. There's not a family or community that hasn't been affected. And when we talk about security, we're talking about the security not just of Ukraine, we're talking about the security of Europe and the United Kingdom as well, which is why this is such an important issue. I think this is such an important meeting. As a group, I think we've had a discussion on the phone a number of times, Mr. President, but be able now to be around the table to take it forward. And I really feel that we can, I think, with the right approach this afternoon, make real progress, particularly on the security guarantees, and your indication of security guarantees, of some sort of Article 5 style guarantees, fits with what we've been doing with the Coalition of the Willing, which we started some months ago, bringing countries together and showing that we were prepared to step up to the plate when it came to security. With you coming alongside, the US alongside what we've already developed, I think we could take a really important step forward today. A historic step, actually, could come out of this meeting in terms of security for Ukraine and security in Europe. I also feel that we can make real progress towards a just and lasting outcome. Obviously, that has to involve Ukraine, and a trilateral meeting seems the sensible next step. So thank you for being prepared to take that forward, because I think if we can ensure that that is the progress out of this meeting, both security guarantees and some sort of progress on trilateral meeting of some sort to bring some of the difficult issues to a head, then I think today will be seen as a very important day in recent years in relation to a conflict which has gone on for 3 and a bit years, and so far nobody's been able to bring it to this point, so I thank you for that.
The only part I understood was that Keir Starmer believes that every single family in the United Kingdom has had their lives changed by the war in Ukraine. I'm just not sure that's true. And Trump gave a funny look right at that moment to J.D. Vance, who was standing in the room when Starmer said that. But Starmer is one of those modern robotic duck speakers who say nothing. And after a while, you realize it. And then you can't unhear it, and you begin to despise even the sound of his voice. If you don't follow UK politics, you won't know what I mean about Starmer, but it's basically the bizarre style of speaking that Chrystia Freeland has perfected.
We have a very impressive deficit of some $60 billion in the last budget. So when do you foresee a return to a balanced budget? Ms. Freeland speaks first.
Mr. Jobin. We are all liberals, and we will not repeat conservative misinformation. We are not going to do the conservatives' work for them. The reality is that Canada's financial record is very strong. We have a AAA credit rating. We have the lowest debt-to-GDP ratio in the entire G7. But speaking of our economy, we have to begin with the fact that we're living in a completely different world. Let's begin with the threat that Donald Trump poses. And as Karina suggested, we have to seize the opportunity of this wave of Canadian enthusiasm to build, to attract investment and jobs.
Just so irritating, usually starting with an obsequious thank you for your question, and then giving a rambling response that is completely unconnected to the answer, that just burns up the time, talks out the clock. And after you hear it a half dozen times, you realize it's not an answer at all, but it's actually a kind of insult delivered with a straight face. How dare you ask me about that? I'm going to thank you for it, and then just burn up the clock talking about whatever I want to talk about. Yeah, well, Mark Carney and his clones have perfected it too. Just take a look. So Carney was in Europe because, of course, he's a citizen of Europe. He has an Irish and a UK passport, so that's his favorite place. He quit Canada to go there for a bigger opportunity, and I'm not sure he's done social climbing there yet. He said he wants Canada to join the European Union. So he's back there, and he thinks that's the place for him to be. Donald Trump is holding our country's private parts in his fists. But instead of dealing with Trump, which is the vast majority of our trade, Carney is over in Europe pretending that they can in some way replace our access to the largest market in the world. It's just across the border by car and truck and train. 90% of Canadians live within an hour of the United States, but Mark Carney thinks Germany is going to save us. It's so weird. So let's start with a question put to Carney when he was in Germany about selling energy to Europe. Now, the Germans came to Canada a couple years ago begging for our energy, real energy, natural gas, not solar energy or electric vehicle, fake subsidies, green scam energy, but actual natural gas, because that's what they use. And they're buying it right now from Russia. And it's not just shaming them, but it's undermining them, because Europe spends more on Russian natural gas and other energy, including oil, than they do to give Ukraine in aid and weapons each year. Let me say that again. On a sheer mathematical basis, if you ask me which side of the war Europe is on, the mathematical answer would be Russia, because if you're measuring strictly on who Europe gives its money to, Europe gives more money to Russia than to Ukraine because of energy. But Justin Trudeau said, no, we're not going to sell you any LNG. There's no business case for it. So Europe wants to change that. Justin Trudeau refused to sell oil and gas, refused to let it even be produced, let alone shipped, let alone sold. 180 degrees opposite of Jean Chrétien and McClellan. But German reporters are more honest than many Canadian reporters. And here's a little exchange.
Prime Minister, just one question about raw materials. Could you please explore a bit more what Canada can realistically actually offer to Germany and Europe, given the fact that ports on the East Coast and also pipelines are still lacking?
Okay, you're welcome to take the second part of my question if you wish. Thanks for the question. Look, there's a huge range of immediate opportunities with respect to critical metals and minerals, and there are medium-term opportunities with respect to all forms of energy, including LNG and hydrogen. And I'll quickly explain how we make those happen. Our government is in the process of unleashing $500 billion of investment in energy infrastructure, port infrastructure, particularly intelligence infrastructure as well, with AI. And a number of those investments, the first of which we will be formally announcing in the next 2 weeks, are with respect to new port infrastructure. And some of the examples in the public domain will include from reinforcing and building on the Port of Montreal, Contrecoeur, a new port effectively in Churchill, Manitoba, which would open up enormous LNG plus other opportunities, and other East Coast ports for those critical metals and minerals. So there is a lot happening. It's the number one focus of this government is to build that infrastructure, and particularly infrastructure that helps us deepen our partnership with our European partners, and particularly Germany.
So yeah, no pipelines. More money for a port in Montreal. Gee, that's a shocker. A plan for Churchill, Manitoba. So that will be 10 years. Are you kidding? If you think it's going to be any faster, just duck speak. Throw in a mention of AI. Why not? $500 billion. That's what he's going to unleash. Does that mean tax dollars? What does it mean that he is going to unleash $500 billion? Why is he the decider? Do we have a centrally planned economy now? Just a bunch of baffle gab? Was there a single word in there that answered the actual question? How are you going to move any of this energy to Germany without pipelines or ports? And by ports, those big LNG liquefaction ports where they take natural gas, supercool it, which it liquefies, it puts it in those funny looking tankers and sends it over there. You can't just build those. Oh, but we have a huge range of opportunities, he said. And how long do you hear that? How long do you hear him say those things again and again and again before, like Chrystia Freeland and Keir Starmer, you realize that you're just being lied to? It's just a way to burn up the time. He's been prime minister for 166 days, by the way. Do you think any of these things are going to be built even in his first term? God forbid there's more. But in fact, Canada does sell our natural gas to Europe, just like we do sell our oil to the world. Now, you might find that surprising because we don't have LNG export ports. But the answer is it goes to the United States of America. We sell, 90% of our oil directly to the United States, same with our gas and our exports, that's going to America. And they take it and they might process it or mark it up, and then they resell it on the world market. And maybe that's why Donald Trump prefers Mark Carney. No pipelines built in Canada means more profits for the U.S. to resell our good stuff. Here, get a load of the Polish Prime Minister to Canada speaking some truth on the CBC of all places. Take a look.
Former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau kind of famously said there was no business case to sell Canadian LNG to Europe. Well, when you look at what the Americans are doing, they sent 44 million tons of LNG to Europe last year. They're obviously seeing a business case for what they're producing. Is Poland interested in Canada's natural resources and LNG in particular? Is that something that you would like to see advance as these two countries get closer together?
Well, remember, some of that LNG that is coming from United States to Europe, to Poland, is also Canadian LNG. But it's being sold for a much higher price, I would say, than when it would come from Canada. Yes, we are constantly interested. We would like the Canadian LNG market to open to Europe. We would like to see the Canadian gas flowing to the east coast on Canada, and the Canadian gas flowing in European pipelines. This is, one of the energy topics that we are working on with Canadians for a number of years. There are others which are also very significant, and we are much more successful in the other areas than gas so far. But if you're able to make a push in that regard, that will be to the benefit of Europe, and that will be to the benefit of Canada.
Hey, but remember, guys, there's no business case for our energy. That's what the master industrialist and tycoon and oil man Justin Trudeau said. Hey, have you ever seen this guy before? I hadn't. His name is Tim Hodgson, and he's Canada's new energy minister. He used to work for Mark Carney at Goldman Sachs and at the Bank of Canada. They're old friends. Take a listen to him in Europe. He was announcing he was so excited to go there.
Parliament is coming back on September 15th, and until then, we're making every minute count. That's why I'm heading to Berlin with the Prime Minister to build Canadian-German partnerships in energy and critical minerals to shore up our economies, industries, and security. And we're not showing up alone. We are bringing a Canadian business delegation to find new European markets for our energy and minerals. By working with our allies, we can give Canadian industry the market certainty it needs to build projects of national interest and ensure our resources reach across oceans, not just across our borders.
Thank you, and again, welcome aboard.
Hey guys, they're building, they're shoring up, they're finding new markets for energy, they're giving certainty to investors, and they're not small-minded people who think America is the answer. They're crossing oceans, not just borders. How do you sell energy to Europe if you don't have any pipelines? And if you won't for probably a decade? Why do you think people in the industry don't already know where energy is bought and sold? We're discovering new markets. You don't think oil men know where oil is bought and sold, and they need politicians to tell them about new markets? We're doing a favor to the industry by showing them new markets. Was that the missing piece of the puzzle here? Canadian oil men just didn't know where to sell their oil and gas, and the Europeans just didn't know who makes oil and gas. And luckily, Mark Carney and Tim Hodgson are going to connect them and unleash this. Was that the problem the whole time, or maybe has it been the anti-pipeline laws, the anti-tanker ship laws, the anti-oil sands laws, the anti-emissions laws, and until a few months ago, a carbon tax, which was going up every year, and by the way, has not been abolished. It's just been temporarily set to 0%, but it could be reset tomorrow to a higher number. Yeah, talk about uncertainty. But you know who can make sense of all this? A government journalist named David Aiken. He knows what the oil and gas industry needs for the Goldman Sachs boys, Mark Carney and Tim Hodgson, to do what the private sector can't do. To them, private industry isn't even in the game. This is about governments making the decisions, government making the deals, government making the funding when things fail, governments bailing them out, just shoveling more money into it until it happens. Here, take a listen.
Quick question on financing. I wonder if the government of Canada, as it did with Trans Mountain, is considering participating in an equity stake in either mineral developers or transporters of energy, or might assist with some other levels of financing as we approach the budget. In other words, other than signing partnerships, is there some tangible way the government of Canada will put some skin in the game financially to help private sector proponents?
So there's a number of different tools that we have, be it through the Canada Infrastructure Bank, through CDEV, through EDC, through BDC, through
Some
SIF.
of these are so risky, these projects, that even BDC is not going to take that risk on. That's why we bought Trans Mountain, because of the risk profile. Needed the government backing it, right?
So again, there are tools like the Canada Growth Fund that take first of a kind risk. The government is going to use all the tools it has to responsibly develop projects, to do it in a way that's responsible for Canadian taxpayers, and do it in the right environmental way and in conjunction with First Nations.
Did you hear that part where David Akin did some liberal splaining, where he said the Liberals bought the Trans Mountain pipeline because the company couldn't handle the risk? That's a lie. The government of Trudeau is what killed the pipeline. The U.S. owners were about to sue Canada for billions, but instead, Liberals said, no need to sue us, we'll just give it to you. We'll buy this dead pipeline that we killed for billions of dollars, huge profit margin for Kinder Morgan, which was actually building it with private money. And then the Liberals bought it at a massive premium. And do you think the Liberals know how to build pipelines? They used tax dollars to do what a private company was going to do on their own. Absolute financial disaster. I think in the end it was 4 times more expensive than the original budget. But to David Akin, it's a success story. And did you hear Hodgson? Not a word about Canadian entrepreneurs, Canadian companies. It's all government funds, government subsidies, government banks. These guys are not capitalists. They are crony capitalists. It's a big difference. By the way, how soon until this will happen? How soon?
Timeline for building the kind of port and pipeline infrastructure that would just allow you to export as much as you want to sell and as much as they want to buy.
So I'm not an engineer. I think the goal, and what I've seen the proponents talking about, is being able to ship in as little as 5 years So that's what their goal is.
Oh, 5 years at the soonest. Got it. So we're going to be shipping LNG to Europe by 2030 earliest. Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for helping get Europe off of Russian oil and gas. I shouldn't say oil, though. There are no plans to get Canadian oil to market. Not a word about oil other than it's not going.
Guarantee that liquid oil, will not be moving through Hudson Bay or through Churchill?
I'm not aware of a proponent who's talking about that right now.
Yeah, that was a pretty quick clip. The last question I think was the best, though. Why would anyone trust a Liberal to get an energy deal done? I mean, these aren't the Chrétien Liberals. These are the Trudeau-Carney Liberals.
Do we face a credibility gap because it takes time to get projects going, approved, and actually being developed and exploited? What's the kind of conversation you're having with those investors?
I looked around that room today, and there were an awful lot of German companies that were pretty interested in working with us.
The Liberals destroyed the oil and gas industry. Do you think they're going to rebuild it? They're not even saying that they will. They're maybe going to get some gas going. They're not going to get the oil industry growing. They say the soonest they expect anything to be built is in 5 years, so that means 10. Not a word about private industry, all managed from the top, like the UN does, like the World Economic Forum does, which makes sense. That's where Carney is from. How long do you think Canadians will put up with all these buzzwords and all these self-cheerleading press conferences and all this fog? Well, my observation is Canadians will put up with it indefinitely.